will be given by Guillaume Semerja. And as you know, you might have noticed that Chris Moore at some point was mentioning that he learned about the spin propagation and cavity method, at least part of it, from me. So to continue the chain, it's fair to say that a good chunk of these methods I learned it from Guillaume.
I'm not that old.
Yeah, despite Guillaume being only a couple of years older than me, I learned that from Guillaume. And I particularly value him for, he's not stopping looking into things because before he really understands them in depth. And in Paris, among the students in École Normale, he's also well known for being one of the few who is able to transfer that depth to the students. And so I hope you will take advantage of him giving you this lecture.
Okay, thanks a lot for the introduction, even if you're putting some pressure on me. And about the first part of saying that I don't stop before having completely understood, you mean that I made you very late on some papers because of that, I guess. But anyway. So, first of all, okay, let me thank the organizers for the invitation, and let me apologize to them, because actually I changed the title from what they proposed, or imposed, I don't know, but I was supposed to lecture about the cavity method, and I changed the title, but I will talk about information theory, but don't worry, at the end I will arrive at something which will fulfill the requirement of talking to the cavity method, but bear with me until the end of the lectures, and you will hopefully see the connection. So, first of all, let me explain why it makes sense, I think, to talk about information theory to such an audience, and in particular in these schools about disordered and frustrated systems in statistical mechanics. So I will describe informally in this introduction what we are going to talk about and why and how. So first of all, information theory was very nicely introduced by Henry Kohn yesterday during his lecture. So I will start by recalling a few points he already mentioned. So what do we think about when we think about information? So you are young people, digital natives, so maybe you don't realize it anymore, but you are always manipulating with your smartphones a lot of information, that is images, texts, sounds, which to a first extent you can think of them as computer files, and more precisely these are strings of bits of 0 and 1s. Okay? So this is information in a very simple sense, and what you do all the time without realizing it is essentially two kind of operation, which are compression. So you have a file and you make it into a smaller file. So for instance, your photos or your MP3s are example of compression of information, and you want to do this in such a way that you can recover them more or less precisely. Okay? So for instance, in the images, you don't want every pixel to get exactly the same value. You don't really need such a level of precision. For a text, of course, it is much more crucial that all the letters are in the right place. There is another operation that you are doing all the time, which is transmission over a noisy channel. So you have, okay, let's say again a file or a message or anything, which goes through a communication channel, which, as discussed by Henry Kohn yesterday, can be radio waves, so there are interferences, Or you can think of the internet as well, so there might be problems in the communication. Some of the information you are trying to send can be dropped because the router is down, for instance, at some point. And so what you get is not what you sent, but is a corrupted version of this. And of course, you want to introduce, in a way, some error correction mechanism to compensate for this noise, okay? So that you can have a conversation on your cell phone without, let's say, too much noise in the conversation. So it turns out that these two problems were already formalized and to a great extent solved, at least from a formal point of view, by Shannon in 48. So the paper mentioned by Henry Kohn yesterday is called The Mathematical Theory of Communication, and I agree with him. It's really a very nice read, even today. So I think it's a rare example of a paper which is still interesting to read 70 years after it has been published. And so we will come back on these two aspects of information theory. So in particular, let me highlight one thing. So there is a concept that you would like to quantify what is information. Because, you know, already when I say information, okay, in the usual sense of it, there is a qualitative or maybe moral notion of the amount of information in information. So you might have a bias, and you might want to order, in some sense, the amount of information contained in, let's say, a selfie of Kim Kardashian, a tweet of Donald Trump, and in the text file of your last paper. But that would be moral prejudice to do it in such a way. But we will see that there is an agnostic way to quantify the amount of information that is contained in a file, let's say. And okay, so you might think at this point that this is only for engineers. You don't care about this as a physicist. But I want just to flash 2 points. I mean, a few other contexts in which you can think that there is something to understand about information, and that touches all of you and also can interest you also if you study, for instance, more soft matter or biophysics. So let me just recall you that at any moment of time in your body and in the body of everything, there is something which happens, which is the transcription, of DNA into RNA, which is produced in proteins. Okay, and okay, this is essentially some form of information treatment. And for instance, you can ask, well, why, having chosen the code that you know with the 4 bases to encode the 20 amino acids, this is a question which pertains to information theory. And also note that this kind of information processing happens in a very noisy environment because it happens with the thermal activation, and a lot of mistakes that are made in this process, and that needs also error correction. Okay? Another point of view is that, I mean, another thing that I want to mention here is the problem of vision. So you know that your vision is based on the fact that you have a detector on the retina, and so this goes through the optical nerve to your brain. And, well, you can imagine that it's not that as if all the points, I mean, all the detectors of your retina had a single fiber going directly to the brain. I mean, there are a lot of information processing and compression at the different stages to process the information from the retina to your cortex. And also, let me finally mention another context in which this kind of problems arise, which is language, natural language. So it's also a way to transmit information. And there is also noise in this process. But as you can guess, for instance, English has a lot of error correcting process included in it, which allows that despite my broken English and my very strong French accent, some information is able to pass from me to you during this process. And one simple fact is that not all combination of letters are allowed in English. And just the fact that you can, I mean, if you hear something which looks like a word which is not English, but, well, you can infer that what I meant was the closest English word that you know, which looks more or less like what you heard, is some kind of error correction. And actually, I'm even adding some error correction by repeating myself several times, which is a form of pedagogy that you can think as an error correction. And finally, to end up this joke, social convention has also invented a feedback mechanism that you can ask me questions if if there is too much noise in the process. Okay, so this is a rough picture of what is information theory and what I want to talk about. So now let me justify why this makes sense, I think, to do this in this set of lectures. So the first thing is that I think that information theory gives a perspective on some aspect of StatMech in general, which is, I think, very useful and I think not very much taught in StatMech curricula. So I hope I will teach you something which will be useful whatever kind of physics you do. But more precisely, the relationship with the content and the program of this whole school is the relationship is the fact that this problem of IT is one of the domain where there has been a fruitful interdisciplinary application of statistical mechanics of disordered system, which was the threads of lectures that Chris Moore started and that will be continued with Florent Zacala and with Federico Ricci-Terzanghi. And so here you can already guess a little bit that indeed it makes sense to consider disordered system because there is noise in all these problems. So having methodology to deal with this noise is important for this from this point of view. And indeed, there has been results which have been first derived using methods of statistical mechanics, which proved to be very useful for people working in information theory and computer science more in general. And so, in particular, what I want to go is towards things that have already been mentioned, so constraint satisfaction problems in terms of, used for error correction. And somebody asked the question yesterday, so at least someone already know what is it about. So it's called the LDPC, and I will come back on what I mean. I want to talk about this later. And finally, to end up this introduction, I have set up a very small web page so that you can find at this address, where I put the outline of the lectures, some references, and a few exercises that I will comment on during the lectures, at which moment you have the background to do the exercises. Okay? So let me start by this. The first thing I announced was the fact that information theory tells us something about statistical mechanics. So this part we'll call maybe pedantically, but the meaning of entropy. So what you know about, entropy from your StatMech experience is, at least two formulas that the Boltzmann microcanonical entropy, which is K times the log of, well, usually it's called omega. So this is the entropy for if you have a certain number omega of available microstates, and you compute it as in this way with K, the Boltzmann constant. Or in the canonical ensemble, more generically, you will consider minus K times the sum over, okay, I will use Julio's notation. So the probability of a configuration times the log of this probability, and okay, with the probability being given by the Gibbs-Boltzmann distribution. Okay, so now I will slightly go away from the notation and introduce the way I will write things. So what I will call Shannon entropy. So for P here will be a probability distribution defined on some finite set which I denote chi. And okay, I will use notation and conventions that are more in use in information theory. So I will denote H instead of S, the entropy. So this will be the sum over the points of this space of the probability times the log of the probability, but in log 2. Okay? And we will see why this choice makes sense, but you can think that I'm just changing the units of the Boltzmann constant by doing that. So maybe. Okay, so what can we say about this? So there is the fact that the entropy of a probability law will be equal to 0 if and only if this probability law is concentrated on a single point. Okay, and also that the entropy will be positive and at most the logarithm of the number of elements in the set, in this alphabet, and this maximal value will be achieved if and only if this probability distribution is just uniform on the set. Okay, so I think you should all know this, and so here is a statement that entropy measures the lack of information on a realization of this random event. So I put this in quotation mark because what we see here is that indeed it's 0 when there is no lack of information, when you are sure of what is going to happen under this probability law. It is maximal when you have the minimal amount of information because all events are equally probable. Okay, but why the log? Okay, so there are many functions which will be growing between these two cases. Let me call them A and B. So the question is really why this particular form or this entropy. And I want to convince you that it's not, I mean, that's really the only one. I mean, modulo a constant factor, but that's really the form which makes the job to measure the lack of information in a very precise sense. Okay, so just before moving to this, let me just define when I will use h, small h of p, which is this is a probability between 0 and 1, I will just mean minus p log. Okay, all the logs will be in base 2, but I will probably forget from times to times. So if you can just add the base 2 everywhere you see a log. And let me remind you that this function has the following form. So it's 0 when the probability is 0 or 1. So this is just the entropy for a two-state probability space where there is one event which is realized with probability p and 1, and the other with probability 1 minus p. And this is maximal when the probability is uniform, and it goes 1, and I will call it 1 bit of information. Okay, so now I want to convince you that this is really a very precise measure of the lack of information. And to do this, I will discuss something which I will call a guessing game. So it's a game with two players, with usually usually called Alice and Bob, but I will call them Amy and Sheldon because that's a game for Amy and Sheldon. So Amy will choose an element x of this set, and Sheldon has to guess x, but how? By asking question to Amy, and she will answer the truth. Of course, not all questions are allowed, because I mean, if he asks what is x, okay, the game is over. So he asks questions which the answer is yes or no, and he wants to get done as fast as possible. Okay. So let's see an example. Let's suppose that okay, there are 4 possibilities. So Amy has chosen between A, B, C, and D. How Sheldon can set up his strategy? So I will represent this as a binary tree, because each time, so he starts, he asks the question: is this A and B? Sorry, is X in A, B? Or, and she answers yes, yes. Or if no, she answers no, X is in C and D. Or D. Okay, so obviously when he knows that X is in A and or B, he has a question: is it A or is it B? And then he has found that it's either A or B. And the same here for the second branch. Okay? But that's not the only.
So the small h, you define the h, just about 2 values of x.
Yeah, so it's it's one chi, the size of chi is 2. So p of x is p or 1 minus p. So okay, the notation maybe well, if you want I can use q. So it might be clearer here. Q. Okay. Q. All right. Okay, so Sheldon can also choose to ask first the question: is it A? And if Amy answers yes, well, she knows the answer is A. Otherwise, well, there are still 3 possibilities remaining here, either B, C, or D. So his second question can be, is it B? Then he know if she answers yes, he knows it's B. But if she answers no, there are still two possibilities, C or D. So he has to ask a last question. What is, whether it's C or D. Okay? And so here, he has another, that's a second strategy that Sheldon can apply to determine which is the value of X. Okay? So, what do you think is the best? Sheldon knows, no, Sheldon does not know X, but he knows the alphabet of possible outcomes. Okay? But of course, he doesn't know X, he knows chi, the alphabet. Okay? So, which one to choose? Well, first one. Why? No, well, actually, of course, my question is not well posed because it depends on. I didn't precise here how she shows it. So, of course, you had the implicit bias that she chooses X uniformly at random. In this case, it is true that this is the correct choice. That's the most efficient one, because you don't know a priori which one it is, so you'd better take the one which is the number of questions to be asked is the most uniform. But suppose Amy will choose A, because it's in her initial, 90% of the time. Then this strategy will be much more efficient. Okay? So let me formalize this. I will call Lx. I will call T, a strategy or such a tree of questions, which is, I will not be more formal than this. It's such a binary tree where at the end you have leaves where you have elements of the set that you are trying to determine. And Lx of T is the number of questions to determine some X in this alphabet with strategy T. Okay, so here LA, LB, LC, and LD are all equal to 2. In the second strategy, LA is equal to 1, LB is equal to 2, and LC and LD are equal to 3. And now, I'm adding one piece of information, which is she chooses it with probability P of X. So now I will be a bit more precise about what is meant by the best strategy. So you see that the number of questions to be asked depend on what was the value of X to be guessed. So I will define L bar of T, the average number of questions Sheldon will ask before having the answer. Average with respect to the probability used by Amy in doing the generation. Okay, and what Sheldon wants to minimize its average, the average number of questions he has to ask before the end of the game. Okay, is this clear? So I claim, well, Shannon did first, that h of p, the entropy of p, is a lower bound on this minimal number of questions. And actually, this is within 1 bit, so 1 question of the optimal. And this is sometimes known as Shannon source coding theorem. Okay? And here, I insist on that. For me, this is really the justification of the fact that the entropy really measures in a very quantitative and precise way the lack of information on X drawn from P, because it's really each time you ask a question, you gain information. And if you choose to count the information in terms of the number of binary questions that you have asked, then the entropy is really exactly, well, within 1 bit, the amount of information is lacking to you before you start asking the question of the outcome of X, of P of X. Is this clear? Did you know that? No? Okay. At least one person is saying no, so this is good. Okay. So, I'm going to prove this because there is nice things to be learned on the way, not just for the proof. So, the intuition, the first intuition is that if the alphabet of possible becomes very large, so obviously you will need to ask more and more questions. So this length Lx should grow. So the first element of the proof is something called the Kraft inequality. And which says that for any strategy, so tree of questions, which has the form I've explained before, the length of the path towards the leaf, so the number of questions to ask, has to obey this inequality, which is that the sum over all these elements of 2 to the power minus the length of this determining path has to be smaller than 1. Yeah, sure. H is the entropy, sure, yes.
And L of T is the number of steps.
Yeah. No, that's why I chose K, called the Boltzmann constant, to be such that I count entropy in bits.
But what does it mean that the entropy bar is
But that's what I meant. That's what I'm arguing, that entropy is a measure of the lack of information. So it has to measure the amount of information you have to gain in order to determine the outcome of such a random event. And I hope we all agree to say that I can count the amount of information by saying every time I ask you something and you answer me yes or no, I'm gaining, let's call it 1 unit of information, and let's call it 1 bit of information. Okay, so for this physics connection, it's obvious that the choice of the Boltzmann constant is crucial. But I made the same one, that L is the number of questions, and H is counted in such a way that one question is 1 unit of entropy.
So whenever I get to the correct amount of questions, plus 1, I will have too much information. So I need the lack of information plus 1, and that's how many.
No, I don't think you should think in this way. I mean, it's random. So sometimes X takes some value, sometimes it takes another value. And so you cannot say that you are counting the number of information and at some point you stop. What I'm saying is that you have a way to design a strategy which on average will not take you more than the entropy plus 1 bits. Okay? You got a question?
Yeah. Is there like a similar inequality for the moment of L? Or variance
Of the Kraft inequality?
Sorry, not L, about L. About number of questions that you need to ask.
Yeah.
Is there like an inequality, the variance of this?
I'm not aware of it, but you should. I mean, if you think that the entropy will be very large, it will be very much concentrated around it. So, yeah, well, no, I don't have a better answer.
And real quickly, that plus 1 in the upper bound implies that the next question I'll be able to have a definite answer.
No, okay, I think that's the same answer as before, that I don't really understand. I mean, first, h of p is not an integer. Okay, and L is not an, the average L is not an integer as well. So it's not, I mean, you see that here, it's not that you can say that after 1.5 questions, I will have the answer. It depends. I mean, sometimes after 1 question, you have the answer. Sometimes you need 3 answers to have the question. But on average, again, on average, you will not need more than the entropy plus 1 questions. Right? Okay, so let me prove this inequality. So I already said that intuitively, if chi becomes very large, so there is a lot of terms in this sum, this L should grow larger as well to compensate for this. This is natural because I mean, if there are a lot of outcomes, you have to ask a lot of questions to decide. And more precisely, let's see how it comes from. So let me call L max. So the max over the symbol of this length, okay, for a given t, but here it's not very important. So I have a binary tree like this. Somewhere I have short path. Okay, I'm doing again the example here because it's the simplest one on which to draw this. So the tree, you could keep on drawing a binary tree behind the points where you stop asking questions. And so here you see that each time you say that here you have a symbol where you have decided that you know the answer in your strategy. You see that it makes a shadow here, where here, what is below, there cannot be other symbol. Okay, by definition, because you will stop at this point. You will not keep on asking questions. So from this, you'll see that the number of leaves here is 2 to the power L max, because it's L max generation of a binary tree. And the number of points in the shadow is the sum over x of 2 to the power how many generation I'm growing the shadow is L max minus L. Okay, and these shadows cannot overlap. They cannot make more than this number. So this is smaller. Just have to divide, and you have this inequality. Okay. So now the second element of the proof is something which was already used by Chris. I don't know if I was not here at the beginning, so I don't know if he defines it. So for security, I will give back the definition, which is the definition of the so-called Kullback-Leibler divergence. So if you have P and Q, which are probability laws on the same alphabet, chi, the definition of the Kullback-Leibler divergence between P and Q, which is denoted on in this way, is the sum over x of P of x times the logarithm, once again in base 2, of P of x divided by Q of x. So this tree is a strategy for asking questions. At some point, you have the point where you decide, for instance, that is A is what I enclosed by a square. At this point, the game has stopped because you know the answer. Okay? So all the rest of the tree will never be encountered. Okay? And so you see that these shadows, by definition, are disjoint, and they cannot cover more than the available number of leaves. Okay, that's all. Only the only thing is saying. Yeah, which is it's all the part of the tree which is below a square where the game has stopped because I decided that at this point I have enough information to decide the outcome. Okay?
So, given a tree, that the tree itself, the T, has no information about the probability.
No. No, that's just a strategy which is valid, but there are trees which are, I mean, the best tree will depend on the probabilities.
So that's why you know the probability, you go compute age, and that tells you.
That tells you what is the optimal length of a tree, and I will come back in a second on how to construct the tree once you know P. Right. I will come back in a second on that. P and Q are probability laws on an alphabet, so there are just number P of x which are between 0 and 1, and such that the sum of this P of x is normalized to 1, and Q as well on the same alphabet. And so this is a so-called Kullback-Leibler divergence between P and Q, and it has a series of properties that are, a few properties that I will mention. So the first is that it's positive, and well, I will not prove it, but it's a two-line computation based on the fact that the log is a concave function, and that you have Jensen inequality for concave function. So I will leave you this to check if you have never seen it. So it's positive, and it's equal to 0 if and only if P is equal to Q. So think of it as a distance, even if it's not exactly a distance in the mathematical sense, for instance, because it's not symmetric. Okay, so now I have these two elements. I have the Kraft inequality and this definition of the Kullback-Leibler divergence. Yes.
The two vertical stripes, you use them as notation for this?
Yes. Yeah, it's a standard notation, so that's why I use it. But, okay, so let me put together the two elements. So let me call Q of x 1 over z times 2 to the power minus Lx, where z is chosen so that Q is normalized. Okay? And let me compute the Kullback-Leibler divergence between P and Q. So it's the sum over this of P, so it's sum over x, P of x, logarithm in base 2 of P of x divided by Q of x, so it's Q of x is 2 to the minus Lx divided by Z, so Z is on top. What I recognize here is that there is a sum of P log P, which is minus the entropy of P. There is log of Z, which is independent of X, and I sum over probability law, so this is log 2 of Z. And then there is log 2 of 1 over 2 to the power minus Lx, so this is Lx, so this is the average length. Okay? So if I rewrite this in another way, I have that L of t minus h of p is equal to the Kullback-Leibler divergences between these two quantities minus logarithm of z, but this is positive as we have seen, and this is positive because by Kraft inequality this is smaller than 1. Okay? So I have proved the lower bound in the statement I made there. Okay, so for any valid strategy or tree of questions, the average length cannot be smaller than the entropy. And now let me argue quickly and answer also Leo's question about, the upper bound. So first, note that if you are given Lx, a set of integer values such that they obey Kraft inequality, then you can construct a tree which has this length of questions. Okay? So the idea, I will not do this in detail, but order, if you order the symbol by growing length, and you put x1 in the leftmost node of depth L of x1, and then you continue. For x2, you take the first available at depth x2, and so on and so forth. And the fact that they obey Kraft inequality implies that you will manage to do this this construction. Yep.
I missed the definition of the top middle board. What is Q?
P and Q are two probability distributions on the same alphabet.
I must be missing something, but like, say T is bigger than 0.
P and Q are probability distributions, so they both sum to 1. So Q cannot be smaller than P everywhere, because otherwise they are not probability distributions. Yeah, so there will be some parts which might be positive, others which might be negative, but on average, it's really a concavity of logarithm. So if you want rewrite this as minus the sum over x of P of x log 2 of Q of x over P of x. This, as the log is concave, this is smaller than the log of sum over x P of x times what was inside the log, which is Q of x divided by P of x. This is 1, this is the log is 0. So you see why, I mean, that's, what is it? Not really, but I will come back later on this. It's a kind of difference between two entropies. I will come back on this. Okay, so for what I was saying, that if you have lengths which obey the Kraft inequality, you can construct a tree with this associated length. Now, so take P take P of x, and then you can say the most frequent symbol, I should associate them with a small set of questions. Okay, because that's I want to be the fastest possible on average. So the most frequent one should be the one on which the answer are the fastest to go out. So I would like to take some L of x, which is the smaller when P is large. And okay, if you look at this at what we have done, you realize that you would like them to be very close to 2 to the power minus L of x. So you would like the L to be okay, I don't want to screw up the sign. So you would like to take I'm trying, but I will destroy the chalk. That's the American one. I mean, I don't know if no, it doesn't work with me. So, but I will do my best. So that's what I'm saying. So if you would like to take the length of the questions associated to some x to be the logarithm of 1 over the probability of sorry, this is x like the probability of the corresponding symbol, but this L has to be integers, so I'm rounding them to the greatest integer above. So this, by definition, obey Kraft inequality. So there is a code, I mean, a tree like this with this associated the associated length like this, and this is certainly smaller than this number, the log of 1 over P of x without the rounding plus 1. Okay. Above. Yeah, that's the correct sailing symbol. That's no, yeah, it's you were to the floor So yeah, so this is the smallest integer, strictly larger than what is inside. So it's at most I'm losing a factor of 1 here. So if I compute the average length for this, so there will be a tree with this length. So the average length for this one will be smaller than the sum over x of P of x times this logarithm in base 2 of 1 over P of x, which is minus the logarithm of P of x plus 1. And here you recognize the entropy of P plus 1. Okay? So this gives you the end of the proof, and also to answer Leo's question, I mean, a way to construct the tree once you know the probabilities in order to optimize this length. Okay, so yep.
The last statement that you just did last time is something with the less than. When the statement over here you have just the less than. Is there some?
You mean the fact that it's strict? Huh?
Yeah, a strict less than on this side and a less than equal on that one. At least I can't really see the. Okay, there we go.
I mean, it's true with the strict, but no, it's just if you think of how things can go wrong here, they cannot go that wrong. But okay, it's a detail. We'll not spend time on this. So let me now make a connection between this. So again, I hope that now you are convinced that entropy is the correct measure for the lack of information. And let me make now the connection with what I introduced as I mean, one of the basic operations you do on information, and which was already discussed by Shannon, about data compression. So think that what you have is your file is, okay, for instance, characters. So you have a string of characters. So each of these is in this alphabet I'm denoting chi. And you want to encode this into a string of bits as short as possible. That's what data compression is about. But of course, you want this to be invertible. So you want to be able to reconstruct the original string of symbols from the string of bits. Okay? And actually, that's exactly what we have solved, the problem I have introduced before in a different formulation. Why is this so? Because, okay, let's take once again one of the examples I've taken. So here is the tree for A, B, C, D. And you see that you can say that at each time you make a step here, on the left you call it a 0, on the right you call it a 1. So I will say that A here is encoded as a 0, B is encoded as 1, 0, C is encoded as 1, 1, 0, and D is encoded as 1, 1, 1. Okay? So now, suppose I have a file with a lot of A, B, C, D in it, and I want to encode this as a string of bits. Well, I can just simply associate to each of the symbol of the incoming string. So xi will be associated to the word associated to xy. So, well, here, for instance, the word associated to A is 0, to B is 1, 0, and so on and so forth. So the string, for instance, okay, let me show you that this indeed does the job. So suppose, for instance, that you are receiving a string which is 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0. So here I'm not saying that where the words start and end, but by construction you can deduce it from just reading this string of bits once. Because you see, you just look at the first symbol and you follow the tree, and the tree tells you take on the left, okay, but then I'm stopping on A. Then I take the next bit it tells me, okay, you start again from the root, take on the right, take on the left. This is a B. Okay? This, I'm starting again, this is an A. And this is right, right, left. This is a C. Okay? So this is uniquely decodable, this encoding. And actually, it's even a bit stronger than that. It's called prefix-free because essentially you can do it on the fly. So you just read the bits one by one, and you're able to reconstruct the original string. And now, if the X size of the original file you were trying to compress are IID with probability P of X, well, what we have seen, translated in this vocabulary, is that you will need at least, and okay, in the forgetting about this plus one, you need n times h of p bits to compress a typical string of xn times xn. Okay? So this is another way of restating more or less the same thing, is that entropy can be viewed as the best rate of compression possible. And here you see that's where I come back on the, an agnostic way of quantifying information is simply how much you can compress them. Okay? So if you can compress a file very much without altering the fact that you can recover it, it means it was more or less empty of information. That's one agnostic view of quantifying this. And actually, you can play with this if you use gzip or any software to do compression. You can, for instance, take English text, trying to compress it. You just look at the difference of the sizes before and after compression, and you can have an estimation of what is the entropy of English. So, yeah, Patrick. Okay. No, so it's a bit. No, it's not exactly this. No, it's not at all this, because here you have to know the probability of the symbols to choose the best encoding. And gzip does something which it encodes on the fly. So at first it takes small blocks, and then it grows bigger and bigger blocks, which comes back often. So it's it's different. But at the end, it's not that. The fact that it's controlled by the entropy rate of the source is this is true whatever the algorithm. Because here we have really derived the best one. The only thing is that here, in an English text, apart, maybe some tweets sometimes, but the letters are not random independent. Okay, it's supposed to be correlations, but actually the correlations are relatively short range, and so you can block them and make larger symbols, which becomes essentially independent. And in particular, in the paper by Shannon, there is a discussion of this, and he produced random English sentences which have no real meaning, but which looks like English, with relatively simple models of the source. Okay. So a few more comments on this. So here I discussed compression in a way that I can perfectly recover the original file from my encoding. But as I said, in terms of for images, for instance, you don't really care about perfect compression. I mean, you don't care at all. I mean, if there is one pixel which is not exactly the same in the original and the final picture, you will not see the difference. So there is also a theory of what is the compromise to be made between the rate of compression, how smaller is the compressed file, and the quality. So the distortion between the original image, for instance, and the one you can reconstruct from the compressed file. And so this is called rate distortion theory because it's precisely a compromise between rate and of compression and distortion. Okay, so let me move now to the next part. It's where I will define mutual information, well, which is a concept which will be useful in the rest of the lecture and also extremely important for Florent lectures. So he asked me to insist on this definition, and it fits very naturally at this point. So once again, entropy is amount of the lack of information. But most of the time, you don't have only one random variable, but you have more than one random variable. In particular, all the context of inference problems, for instance, the stochastic block model described by Chris, was that you have a random variable, which are the labels on the vertices of the graph. And you don't observe this random variable, but you observe a correlated random variable, which are the presence or absence of the edges in the graph. Okay? And you want to gain, once again, information about one of the variable by observing the other one. Okay, so here I will explain how to quantify the mutual information between these two random variables. Okay, so again, an inference problem is that typically you have x, which is random, and you observe y, and you have to guess x. Okay, and the question is, I mean, how much information do you need to do this? So to quantify this, I will be maybe a bit more formal, but I think that's useful. So I have x, y, which are a pair of random variables on chi and another alphabet which I denote chi prime. Okay, and I will denote, so these two random variables a priori are not independent, so I have to discuss, I mean, they are described by a joint law P of xy, which is the probability that the random x is equal to x and the random y is equal to y. And here, you might think that, I mean, I'm a bit pedantic here, but I'm following a convention that is useful if you don't want to mix things in this setting. That for me, the capital letters are the random objects, and the small letters are their possible values. Okay? So this is the joint law, so the probability that x and y takes these two values, and from them, I can define, well, the marginal laws. For instance, the law of x is just the probability to observe a certain value of x, whatever the value of y. So to obtain this marginal, I'm just summing over the variable I'm not observing. Okay, so I could define similarly py by summing over x. And I will also define a conditional law which is, for instance, the conditional law of x given y, to be denoted in this way, will be according to bias formalism will be the joint law for these two values divided by the marginal of what I'm conditioning upon. Okay, this clear the notation? Well, I think that's a concept you're certainly familiar with, but what maybe you are less familiar with are the various entropies one can define at this point when one has more than one random variable. So let me define a series of entropies. Well, first of all, you can view x and y together as a single random variable, just that it takes values which are a vector of two things. So what I will denote now, I will slightly change the notation with respect to previously. So now, here I will denote h of x and y instead of h of a law. Because here I was using h of p, but now I have a lot of p's. So in order not to confuse, I will precise inside the h what is the random variable I'm considering. So this is just the entropy of the joint law of x and y. So it's just the sum over all the possible values of minus p log p. Okay. I can also define, of course, h of just the variable x will be just, well, the entropy of the marginal law of x. And now I would like to define the entropy of x given y. Okay, so again, x given y, you see, the law is defined here, so it's a probability law with respect to x. Okay, so the most natural thing to do will be the sum over x of p of x given y logarithm of p of x given y. Okay, so this is the usual entropy for the marginal law, except that this still depends on y. So this is not just a number. So what I'm going to do, well, I will average over y with its marginal law. Okay, so it's the average with respect to the distribution of the conditioning variable of the entropy of the conditioned variable, right? And here, if you look at this, you realize that this is minus, there is a sum over x and y of something which is actually nothing than the joint law of x and y. But inside the logarithm, now it's the conditional one. Okay. And now, the mutual information of the title is defined as, so it's I, or between the mutual information between x and y, is defined as the Kullback-Leibler divergence between the joint law and the product of the marginal laws. Okay? In such a way that this is 0 if and only if the joint law is equal, okay, let me maybe put the arguments for you to see this more easily. If the joint law is equal to the product of the marginal laws, which means that x and y are independent. Okay, so, I mean, if you have two variables which are independent, obviously you have no mutual information because they are independent. But to be more concrete about this quantity of information and to answer one of the questions about the meaning of D as a difference between entropy, we shall see it now. So this, if I took the definition of the Kullback-Leibler divergence I gave before, it's so the average with respect to the joint law of the logarithm of the ratio between the joint law and the product of the marginal laws. Okay. As usual, it's a log of a product, so I can play and put write the log of the product as the sum of the logs to see different terms appear. And so here I can write it in various ways. So first of all, if I write the sum like this, you should see rather easily that this is the entropy of x plus the entropy of y minus the entropy of the joint law. Okay, just by manipulating, I mean, just writing the log of this product as the sum of the logs and using the marginalization relations, which tells me that as this is by definition is positive, so this tells me that the entropy of a joint law is always smaller than the sum of the individual entropies, and with equality if the two are independent. But I can also realize that, for instance, okay, if I take here this and view this as P of x given y of x given y, I can also write this as h of x minus h of x given y, right? Given just recognizing the definition I given before. And again, this being positive, this means that h of x given y is always smaller than h of x, which is the mnemotechnic way of remembering it is to say that conditioning reduces entropy. And indeed, I mean, the larger the entropy, the more disorder or lack of information you have. If you condition on something which is correlated to x, well, x will fluctuate less, so we'll have smaller entropy. And the difference between the two is precisely the amount of information you have gained by observing y. And once again, it's a difference of entropy, so it's a gain of information measured in bits in a very precise way. Okay? And this will be very much used by Florent in his lectures. Okay, so this is almost the end of the first chapter. Let me add a few comments before moving to the beginning of the next one in the last 10 minutes. So So just, I mean, the small exercises I have put on the web page. So there is one that, I mean, if you don't remember or if you have not seen this recently, is to show that the Gibbs-Boltzmann distribution, so the canonical ensemble, is the one which is maximizing the entropy of a probability law on your set of configuration under a constraint on the average energy. Okay, so I think this is pretty simple. There is also, I mean, you can also check that, or prove that the uniform distribution is the one that maximizes the entropy without any other constraints. And here, I mean, you can think of the, I mean, you can do this by standard technique of maximization, but you can also think of the use of the Kullback-Leibler divergence to have another proof of this. And another that, I mean, I didn't write it as an exercise, but you can do this, and in particular, if you want, you can look at in Shannon's paper, in particular in the appendix 2. So the approach I follow to, I hope, convince you that this entropy is the correct amount for the lack of information, actually is not exactly the one Shannon follows in his paper, but he does something which is complementary and I think also very important. So he said, assume that I have, okay, so here I'm writing the probability law. Let's say that there are m elements, and I want an entropy which is a function of the probability of the m elements, which is continuous in the probability of the individual elements. I want that the entropy of the uniform distribution over m elements, I want this to be growing with m, which is, I mean, a natural requirement. I mean, the bigger the alphabet, if everything is uniform, the larger the lack of information about the outcome. And finally, if I impose something which is essentially that, okay, let me draw it in this way. So suppose that, okay, for simplicity, I will draw 3 elements. So I have P1, P2, and P3. This, I can view it as first choosing either the first branch or the second one with probability either P1 or the complementary probability. So what I meant by this equality is that I want the entropy of this law to be equal to the entropy of this plus, in the case I'm going to the other branch, so with probability P2 plus P3, the entropy of the choice between the two other ones, which are probability P2 over P2 plus P3 and P3 over P2 plus P3. In other words, I want the entropy to be additive under any decomposition of my space of probabilities into blocks, which is something that is, again, rather natural to impose. And it shows that with these only requirements, then the only possibility is up to some constant, the sum over the p log of pi. Okay, and you can. It's a non-completely trivial exercise, and again, if you look at Shannon's paper, you will have the solution of this. So it's another way of convincing yourself that this is the good definition of the entropy. Yeah.
So, definition of mutual information. That line H that you derive, if you derive this line HX plus HY minus HXY. So that seems like natural if you think of like unions and overlaps. So that's kind of like an intuitive definition of what I thought. If I have no intuition for your definition of mutual information in terms of D, can you give some statements like why did you define it that way?
Well, I mean, the two are equivalent. So if you want, take this as a definition and take this as a property. But I mean.
How do you think of it? What is D that it gives you?
I mean, once again, if you think that you want to measure how much X and Y are correlated, so you want to measure the distance between their joint law and the product of their marginal laws. Up to now in the lecture, I have introduced only one measure of distance between probability distribution, so use this one. Okay, I mean, that's not a good answer because there are many other norms, I mean, or distances between probability distribution, but okay, in the context of this lecture, that would be the justification. But I mean, again, if you are more happy with this definition of this definition, take this as a definition and the rest as consequences. So,
some information from X, from Y to X, if they are independent from 0, but if they are not independent, you gain that information. So that is completely different to D.
That?
By using the information based on D also is intuitive.
Yeah, but I mean, the problem is that here you could use any distance between probability distribution that is not clear why. I mean, I think that maybe for me that's the best one. Because, I mean, if you believe that, again, entropy measures lack of information, if you observe just X, you have just an a priori lack of information, but I give you Y instead. The difference between the two, I mean, is what you gain when I tell you what is Y. I mean, again, you can think of it in many ways, and I think Florent will explain that again a lot. So, yeah. Take all of them, I think, but take your best pick. Yeah, that's what the last thing I said is maybe the most convincing one, but I mean, mathematically they are equivalent. So let me just, in 1 minute, announce what we shall do in the following. So we will start the problem of this communication over noisy channels. And so I have already said colloquially what I mean by this, and we also saw it in Henry Kahn's lectures. But here I will try to define it more precisely. So I have a message which is sent through a noisy channel, and in output I have some corrupted message. And let me give two definitions of channels so that you can have a concrete example in mind. So here, if I think that in input I am sending bits, okay, so here that's a big difference with what we saw yesterday, is that I'm only talking about discrete information theory instead of the continuous version introduced yesterday. And there is a channel which is called the binary erasure channel, where the definition is as follows. So you have in input zeros or ones, and you get in output of the channel either 0 or 1 or nothing. Okay? So something that I will denote with an asterisk. So this is a random channel. So with some probability, if you send a 0, you get a 0. But it might be that your internet packet is lost because some router is down along the way. And I will denote 1 minus epsilon, the probability that you get it correctly, and epsilon that you lose it. Okay? And symmetrically, a 1 is correctly transmitted with probability 1 minus epsilon, and is lost with probability epsilon. So epsilon is the probability of erasure, and the name of binary erasure channel that I will call Beck. Nothing to do with Bose-Einstein condensates, but I will use this word. And let me just define the other channel with which we are going to play, which is called the binary symmetric channel, which is harder to pronounce the acronym, and I will not try. But so it's BSC. And here, in input, you still have zeros and 1, but in output, you also have zeros and 1, and with some probability, well, this is transmitted correctly. And with another probability, there is a mistake, and the mistake means here flipping a spin. Okay, so here you have with probability 1 minus p a correct transmission, and with probability p a spin flip. And okay, it's symmetric, so the probability of flipping is symmetric in the two. Okay, so these are the two basic channels you can think of if you try to transmit binary information. Just to finish, you see that there is a difference between the two, is that here, if you receive a 0 or 1, you are sure of that was the correct bit which was sent. If it's an erasure, you cannot tell, but at least you know that there has been a problem here. Here, if you receive a 0 or 1, well, you have no clue. With the only thing you can say is that, well, with probability p, this was the other value. Okay? And, okay, now the challenge is, can we do an operation before sending the message to compensate for this lack of this loss of information because of this noise, in order that we can still recover the original message. Okay, and this we shall do on Monday. Okay, thanks.
So here you mean the bit is undetectable; it's not erased.
No. It's a bit different. No, you really see that you have not received it. It's not that you receive. Let's say that you receive a special symbol that tells you have not received, but there was something. Yeah. No, it's well, it's important actually. Okay, thank you.